So today we're going to be taking a look at creating the Shepard Fairey style of art, almost like a screen print, but with different levels of tones, highlights, shadows, to really exemplify a very illustrated style that Shepard Fairey has developed and become very successful with. We have this image of a female eye with a tear, and we're going to start out by first looking to duplicate out the layer, so we always have an original copy to work with. I can right click on the layer and duplicate layer. With this copy, we're going to first desaturate this image. With desaturating the image, I'm going to go up to Image at the top navigation, down to Adjustments and Desaturate. You also have the ability to use the Adjustments panel on the right side navigation and click on the black and white filter, but I like to apply it onto the actual layer, and I can get into modifying these tones and values momentarily. So as I turn it to the desaturation, there isn't a lot of contrast happening. There is a lot of gray tones, but we need to really push these darker colors and lighter colors so there is a contrast. So I'm going to go up to Image, Adjustments, and Levels. And we can see that this white area is kind of representing in the middle, but we're not really getting that true black or that true white. So I'm going to first look to push up my white, grabbing the little white arrow and pull it over to the left, getting a better white value happening in the image. Then I'm going to grab the black arrow, and as I drag to the black arrow, I'm looking for more of that true black, and there are particular areas that are really going to be representative of that black, whether it's the inside of the pupil. I want to make sure not to necessarily take away too much detail, so you have to find that happy medium that still gives you those black values, but is not overpowering the entire image. And again, inside, I'm going to modify this gray arrow, and I just want a little bit more contrast, a little bit darker tone, so I'm getting those white punches of color. So with these adjustments, it allows me to get a higher contrast overall image. Once I have this, I'm going to click OK. Now that we have this, we want to simplify this style. Again, I'm going to duplicate out this layer just so we can see the difference from the realistic image to the filter that we're about to apply. So with this new layer, I'm going to go up to Filter, down to Filter Gallery, and we're going to attempt to see what we can do with a cutout filter. I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so we can see it a little bit better. And even though this is a low-res image, we are going to modify this later on. Right now, it's a matter of finding the correct numbers for number of levels, edge simplicity, and edge fidelity. If I want to reduce this a little bit more, I still want to get those black and white tones, but we're really not getting that detail that we're hoping for from the eye and those different features. So I'm going to drop my edge simplicity. With the number of levels, if I want to get a little bit stronger contrast, I still want to pull up some of these little lighter elements inside of the pupil area. We can see those tones. And even though it is very rough around the edges of these, this does give me a good sense of tones and where light sources are going to be applied onto certain areas. If we go too simple with it, we're just losing too many tones. So it's important to try to figure out what's the best balance overall. Again, I want to try bringing out that tear element. We can always add in additional elements, but this is a pretty good sense of where we can find a contrast. Again, we can modify our simplicity a little bit, but I don't want to lose too much detail. So we'll just reduce this down to 2. And again, the levels, I still want to bring out that little bit more contrast inside the eye. And it takes some time to make sure that you're getting all the elements that you're looking for. Again, we don't want to lose all the details. So I still want to really kind of focus on trying to fix this darker area. And even though it is very detailed, again, rough for what we have, it does have a good, easy separation to really see where the eye of the image is. So once I have this, I'm going to click OK. And now that I have simplified it with the cutting out, or with the cutout of the filter gallery, I could take a look again if I wanted to try applying the same effect twice. See if it's going to even out or bounce out a little bit better. Or we can just look to work with this type of image. The one thing I would consider doing is cropping down some of this dead space, allowing us to focus on the eye and the teardrop, but not necessarily needing this nose area, because it is a lot of just color. I'm going to crop a little bit of the left side as well. But this gives us the ability to look at this darker area. And I'm just going to fix this little green spot. But once I have this image cropped down, we're going to look to save it. I go to File. We can keep it as a PNG file, so I'm going to go File, Export, and save it into my downloads. Then we're going to go over to Adobe Illustrator. In Adobe Illustrator, we're taking a look at one of Shepard Fairey's works. With Shepard Fairey's works, if I take a closer look at the details of this image, you can see that it does use a very simplistic color scheme, from these different blue tints and shades to this red that it gives a good pop of color. And with this, we're going to use the same color combination to create out our image. I'm first going to look to place in the image that we saved. So I'm going to go up to File, down to Place, choose out the image. Go to my downloads. I have the tears cropped image. I can place it in. I can scale this up. Right now my document size is about 11 or 8.5 by 8.5. I can always modify the artboard, clicking on the artboard tool and focusing just on the area that I want. Once I have the image though, we're going to look to get the color palette that we need from the poster of Shepard Fairey's work. To get Shepard Fairey's work, just go through the process again. I want to take and place in the picture of Shepard Fairey's work. I need to scale down this image so it just is a lot easier to work with. Going too big will take up a lot of time, take up a lot of space. But with the image now selected, I'm going to go up to my top navigation, and we're going to do an image trace, but we're going to reduce it down to whether it's 6 or 16 colors, cutting it down so we don't have too many tints, too many shades happening. We're going to choose out 6 for this. We can always add in colors later on. Now that we've traced it, we're going to click on Expand. And with Expand, it's now simplified into the 6 colors. And we want to take these 6 colors and save it as our own color scheme. So to save it as our own color scheme, we're going to click on the folder icon in the swatches panel. We can have selected artwork, so it's recognizing what is selected here. We could include tints as well, but we only have 6 colors, so it is going to match all the colors inside the group. I click OK, and we see that it's now created out the red, the light off-white color, as well as different tints of blue up to this darker blue color. And we can use this for our own design. Now that we have this, we're going to look to take a look at our layers. And in our layers panel, I'm going to create out a new folder that we can use for drawing out sections. For drawing out these tones, we can see that we have different values, but obviously it is very rough looking. You have the ability to use a couple different tools. Finding out what's most comfortable for you is going to be the real question. We could use the pen tool and understand that the pen tool is just a matter of clicking and dragging, or I can match out the curves as needed. Once I have that shape, I can match the color tone or go from the swatches colors that we have here and use that tone. If I want to use a different tone or a darker blue, I could look to drag this blue color onto the new color. And now I'm going to go into the swatch to create a darker blue color. It can still work, so I'm going to click and drag this down onto our color swatches so I can always recognize it, but it can still be representative of the dark color that we need for a design. Next, we're going to take a look at other tools that you can consider using. You may want to consider using the pencil tool. With the pencil tool, it's just a matter of clicking and dragging around the area that we want to draw. So if I wanted to focus on drawing out the pupil shape, I can actually see that the pupil is connected to another area outside of the eye. So I'm going to click and drag around any area that has this darker tone. And you can see it's just kind of based off of your hand motion, trying to replicate and create out the design that we see. But I'm simplifying it, not focusing on every single detail, but just the details to really get the shape overall. As we go up here, yes, we are going to run into more complicated areas with the eyelashes. Just try to simplify it as much as possible, still maintaining the look and feel. But we can always add in pieces later on, so don't feel like it needs to be exactly perfect. Or we can always cut out areas later on as well. It was a big chunk of color, but again, we will take a look at how we can break it up. So once I have that shape, again, I could use the swatches already created. Just use out that blue color. And as I'm drawing these out, I can see that I have this on layer 2. The original image has it on layer 1. So if I were to hide out my original image, you can see the difference of having a more simplified shape, just representative of the area I'm trying to create. Now we have other tones. We have lighter tones or lighter blue or tones that we want to put in. So if I'm looking at this dark gray that's lighter than the almost black, I can click and drag around those areas and understand I can look to draw out shapes that are going to fill this basic area, but we're going to place this behind our darker tone. So it's just fulfilling what we're looking for matching out these darker shadows. And click and drag around the piece. And yes, you have to have a steady hand with using this tool, or you might want to use a drawing tablet in the same way. Once I have this shape drawn out, again, I'm just going to pick out from my samples. Right now it's appearing in front of my dark blue eye, so I can hit Command or Control left bracket, moving it behind the area that I had. Now looking at my layers, I'm going to open up layer 2 and I can see how these layers are organized. If I do need to get other details, I can always hide a path out, just clicking on the little eye icon to make it disappear. This gives me the ability to now focus on other details. Clicking and dragging, maybe getting the lines inside the iris. And then I can go in with a lighter blue tone. So if I were to place that darker blue tone, you can see how that whiter or that lighter blue tone is going to sit on top of it. So again, just hiding out that for a moment. We'll look to draw in another piece. And obviously we can get a lot better detail if I take my time, zoom in, but we're just looking to really understand the process and see how it's going to apply onto a shape. I can match out this light blue tone. Now we do have this shine, and I could go back to the pen tool. It gives me a little bit better control in these curves that I see here. It does have a very white tone to it. What I can look to do is change it out to this light variation, this eggshell color that I have. And like we saw with the actual pupil, it did have a transparency to it. So I could always go over to my transparency panel and look to reduce the opacity so it's not as strong. But it also allows me to reveal details that are underneath of it. So I drop it down to 50% for right now, and I put back the original blue piece. We can see if it works. If the tone does work, I can keep it as is, or I can raise this up and just experiment to figure out what tone is going to look best for my design. So again, just going back over different chunks of areas of the eye. These pieces can be hidden behind other pieces as well. So if I draw around the darker areas, we can see that I've gone into the darker area. If I move this layer underneath, I can hit Command left bracket or Control left bracket to send this backwards to make sure it goes behind the blue layers. Or just click and drag that layer over in the layers panel. It was originally on top. Now I'm moving it down underneath of this medium blue color. But what we're doing is just compiling every little different tone by putting in chunks of color. This chunks of color allows us to get a little bit better accuracy. So again, if I want to focus on certain details, drawing around the area, I'm going to simplify a lot of these chunks because they are bigger. I don't need to get every single one, but just helping to define the color that we're looking for. I can send this back again. Now we'll do another chunk. And if I ever want to deselect on an object, I can always hit Command Shift A and deselects off the object. Again, I'm just seeing a bigger chunk of lighter color here. And I am saving the details of the teardrop for later on. But we'll see once I have these areas kind of drawn out. Pick up this lighter blue and just send it back. So we're starting to compile and really create out the shape of the eye and the details that make up this small little focal area. So even though I am going into certain areas that I've already filled, again, it's just a matter of placing it behind other layers so it fits into the design. So we have this darker tone, just draw around the area that you want to have this darker tone. And I'm going to incorporate this little piece because we are going to erase out some of this darker tone that we originally had. I use my eyedropper tool, match out a color. And again, Command or Control left bracket, setting this backwards behind the shapes. Just to do a comparison from the original image that we were working with, if I make a copy of this and slide it over, just so we can see the eye, what we're doing is just simplifying the concept. And even though close up, yes, it is just chunks of color compiled together, further away it will replicate and create out the design that we're looking for. If I do want to bring out a tone or feel like the tone is not matching to what I want, there are certain aspects I still want to bring this teardrop shape in. I can base it off the design, or I can take elements that I see from here and look to draw them out, and I can bring this over to my other area. Once I have that shape, click and drag it over so we can start to see the placement. So if I need to modify shapes, I can always use the direct selection tool to select on an anchor point, adjust a placement so I'm seeing a little bit more of the white. I do want to bring out a darker tone as well, so I could consider putting in another aspect or draw out my own element. Be careful if you have an object selected, it may undo a piece that you already had. This darker blue is a little bit too dark, so I can reduce it down, try a different tone, or adjust the placement so it's not taking up as much space. So as I start to now do a comparison, seeing what details I might have missed, I might want to consider certain areas. I can hide out certain layers or hide out all my paths, so I can draw in certain chunks of color, making sure that they're accurate in the placement. So I definitely want to get this darker element inside the eye. So if I'm putting those pieces back in, you can see that just darker area helps to create some depth in that side chunk. But going back through, a couple little other details I want to get, making sure that incorporate. Once I have a piece, if you want to focus on just getting every piece that you want of a specific color or whatever chunks, just draw them out, take your time to match them to what you need. If I take a look at the teardrop that I originally drew momentarily, placement-wise, it's not in the right spot, so I do want to get this more accurate. Once I start getting into the right positioning, it will allow me to make sure that things are lining up how I want. So now as I start to put other pieces back in, I can see how things are going to line up. And even though this isn't necessarily fitting to what I originally planned for, I'm going to add another artboard just so we can do a comparison. But if I were to block out this view, I'm going to focus on just the trim view. Now we can see the left side versus the right side. Seeing these lighter tones or warmer tones of colors. Obviously, I can still add in a couple little details or elements around the eyelashes. I'm missing certain aspects, so I'm going to use the pencil tool to draw them out. When it comes into the chunk, I may want to use my eraser tool as well. If I have a small enough eraser, I can erase out with the object selected, only affecting the area that is selected. And I'll zoom in, get better detail. So this trim view allows you to kind of focus and make sure whatever you drew at outside, you don't necessarily need any of that. And don't let it become a distraction when you have this trim view to work with. So there are good uses of the tone. If I'm doing a comparison between the two, it is getting more accurate, but there are still details that I can consider adding in. Chunks of lighter colors on the iris. Just a matter of moving the layer to the correct position. Or if I take a look at the original image back in Photoshop, why I originally hid the image, I can see if I want to add in any other aspects or elements in the design. I might want to consider the eyelashes that I can see in the top right. There's just little details that you might miss when you're not seeing the original. You could also consider using the brush tool. With the brush tool, I can focus on drawing out some details. I'm going to make my darker color so I can draw out some of the lines. Because I'm starting to add in those eyelashes, it starts to give a better sense that this is an eye. But it's more about just seeing the whole of all these elements. I may want to create a little bit better contrast along the rim of the eye, or edge of the eye here. So I can pick out a darker tone. Really create a separation between the inside of the eye versus the outside of the eye. But once you start to have all these mixes of tones, now we're really starting to get the overall visual that we're looking for. Other details that I might want to consider, because I'm not necessarily getting real attention that I'm looking for from the tear, I could draw in other elements to connect up back towards the pupil. And even if it's a minimal element, just giving a darker shade. But I previously did this similar to with the same process. You take a look at this young female, just a side view of her face, doing the same method. Unfortunately, my computer crashed before I had the ability to get it done. But we can see the comparison of adding in these different tones. If I wanted to give a pop of color, we can see how I'm just using the reds to add in a little bit more dimension, but still replicating what I'm seeing and just adding in chunks of color to build it out. So it could obviously use more details, but unfortunately Illustrator crashed originally. But this gives us a lot smoother overall look than you will get in Photoshop. So once I have this type of style, I'm going to save this first as an Illustrator file. File save. Let's say Fairey. Then if I do want to pick up some of these details or maintain some of these aspects, I'm going to go to export as, change to a Photoshop PSD file. I'm going to use the artboards, but only change my range so I'm maintaining 1. I'm going to export. I'm going to write the layers, that way I can modify something if I don't like it. So once I have that now saved, I may want to consider getting into adding a pattern or element that's going to help really define my design. So I'm going to look to draw out a pattern. I can start out with a circle shape. With a circle shape, once it's drawn out, let me give it a color. And the reason why I'm not seeing it right now is because I still have the trim view on. So I'm going to uncheck that and we can see our original circle. But with this circle, I'm going to go up to Effects, Distort, Pucker and Bloat. Adjusting this, I can get into modifying out the shape. Click OK. I'm going to first then expand the appearance so it has the original shape. I'm going to rotate it on a 45-degree angle. Next, I'm going to draw out a shape for a flower. So placing it over top, take a look at modifying out the color. I do want to make sure that I have this centered, so I'm going to select out both pieces. I can use the line tool to make sure that they are centered. But I'm going to click on my direct selection tool to modify out the circle. Using the anchor point tool, I can get a sharper point. And then direct selection tool, click and drag this to modify the shape out. If I want to play with or experiment certain pieces, you can adjust the shape, distort it, manipulate it around. I can play with the scale. or selecting it with the direct selection tool, I can modify the shape as well. So again, just going to try scaling it with these two anchor points selected. You can see I can kind of manipulate the shape, squeeze it down, or warp it into a different shape. Once I have the shape, I do want to test out and see if I can mirror this out. I'm just going to simplify it so it's only 4 corners. And again, I'm going to go to Object and Expand. So with these, I can place it to center these. But I also want them a little bit tighter. Just reduce it down. And again, I'll select out both so I can get everything centered. So with these selected, I'm going to cut out the interior with the shape builder. I can hold down Alt or Option, just cutting out chunks. So it becomes a design. If I do want to tweak this at all, I can reduce the space. So I'm going to step back a little bit. So again, with the shape builder, again, hold down Alt or Option, click and drag through the pieces that you don't want. Now we have a designed aspect. With this selected, I'm going to go up to Object, Pattern, and Make. With this pattern, I do want this to sit very tightly together. I'm going to change this grid system, just the spacing a little bit. So height, I want a little bit more space. I'm going to get rid of the width so that they're tighter and working together. So once I have that, I can check Done. Now the pattern is created in my swatches. So if I were to take a look at my swatches or draw out a shape with my swatches, click and drag, draw out a big square, and click on my swatch, I see that texture being placed into my design. With this pattern, I'm going to actually look to bring this over to Photoshop. We're going to open up the now modified Photoshop file. I'm going to go File, Open. Click out the Shepard Fairey style. It does maintain all the layers. If I open up the folder, you can see all the different paths that make it up. But we're going to actually click and drag the pattern from this design and bring it into Photoshop. So just understand, if you want more of this pattern, you'd have to make it smaller or make a bigger box itself. So if I want to modify this a little bit, I'm going to go back over to Photoshop, expand this box bigger, so I have more to work with, and then click and drag it over to Photoshop, dropping it on. So you can see how much more detail I can get from this design. So the reason why I did this is that I can kind of experiment to see how this texture can be placed and modified with the work. So right now it is very strong and overpowering. I can take a look at blend mode to see how it's going to modify on top of the design. When you get down into the overlay section, we can see how it's really applying onto the design. If it's working for you, if it doesn't work, just a matter of kind of experimentation to see what works best. I'm just looking for it to be subtle. I can always play with the opacity. Right, for right now, I'm going to leave this on the soft light. What I'm going to do is duplicate this out just so I have a backup. I'm going to add a layer mask to be able to erase out some of this texture. I'm going to go over to my eraser tool. With my eraser, soften my hardness and get a lot bigger brush. With this, I'm going to drop the opacity as well, so I'm not erasing out completely. But I'm looking to erase out so that I can use the details I originally had from my eye. And then this pattern is surrounding the other aspects of the design. So it allows me to focus on the primary area of the teardrop in the eye itself, but this texture is kind of surrounding out. Then we can look to experiment with different aspects. If I wanted to play with different features, drawing out a shape, or seeing how other aspects can be brought in. Maybe I want to play with diagonal shapes. You can always draw them out in Adobe Illustrator as well, but we're just going to see how we can experiment. The dark red or deeper red. I want to place this underneath of my texture, so I'm getting that texture inside the area. Again, I can try blend mode to see how it's going to affect on the design, how it might modify a certain space. See, it just creates an interesting aspect on the design itself. If you want to play with different opacities, modify, see how it's going to affect the design. It's just all about experimentation, what you're trying to create with the overall look and feel. If you want to play with text, you can use text arrangements. There's many different possibilities that you can create. But I hope this helps you kind of grasp that you can really draw something different, unique, definitely inspired by the work of Shepard Fairey. Feel free to bring in other textures as well. But explore, create, and I hope you enjoy. Take care.